Sometimes the difference between life and loss is not expertise, but attention, the voice would later say. But in that moment, no one was listening, not even Daniel Whitmore, a man who built his empire on control, precision, and certainty, because right now his world was collapsing in front of him. His son Lucas lay motionless in a leather booth of a five-star Manhattan restaurant, his small chest rising unevenly, each breath weaker than the last. The private physician kneeling beside him whispered urgent instructions, fingers trembling despite years of training. It's not responding. This isn't in the chart. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt something unfamiliar press against his chest, something he couldn't buy, couldn't command, couldn't fix. Fear, real and silent, spreading like cold air through the room. Glasses sat untouched, conversations faded. Even the city noise beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows seemed to disappear, as if the entire world had paused to watch a man lose control. And yet, 20 feet away, behind the quiet rhythm of clinking silverware and soft footsteps, Emily Carter stood still, her tray balanced perfectly in one hand, her eyes locked not on the chaos, but on Lucas. She had noticed it earlier, the slight delay in his blinking, the unnatural angle of his shoulders, the subtle rhythm in his breathing that didn't match the room. Things no one else saw, things she wished she didn't recognize so quickly. She set the tray down. Without a sound, her movements calm, almost invisible, like someone stepping into a role they never truly left. Across the room, Daniel's voice cracked, sharp and desperate. Do something. But the command echoed into uncertainty, because no one knew what to do. Not the doctor, not the staff, not the powerful men standing frozen with their million-dollar decisions suddenly meaningless. And then, through that silence, a quieter voice emerged, steady, grounded. You're missing it, Emily said. Not loud, not demanding, but precise, the kind of voice that didn't ask for attention. It took it. The doctor looked up, confused, irritated. Ma'am, please step back. But she didn't move, her eyes never leaving. The boy, his breathing pattern shifted 20 minutes ago, she added softly. And for a second, time seemed to hesitate, as if deciding whether to listen. Daniel turned, his expression sharp, dismissive, ready to shut her down. Just another waitress crossing a line she didn't understand. Stay out of this, he said, his voice cold, controlled, the way it always was. But Emily didn't react, didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She simply took one step closer, her gaze unwavering. And in that moment, something about her stillness felt louder than all the panic in the room. Something that made even the doctor hesitate for half a second too long. Because deep down beneath the chaos, there was a quiet certainty in her eyes, the kind that doesn't come from guessing, but from knowing. And as Lucas's breathing faltered again, thinner now, slipping between seconds, Emily finally spoke, just above a whisper. If you wait any longer, you'll lose him. The room did not move, but something shifted, subtle, almost invisible, like the moment before a storm changes direction. The doctor hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, long enough for doubt to slip in, long enough for Daniel Whitmore to notice that the man he trusted with everything did not have control, and that hesitation felt louder than any answer. What are you saying? Daniel demanded, his voice lower now, sharper. But underneath it, something fragile began to surface. Emily did not look at him. She stayed focused on Lucas, watching the small details others missed. The way his fingers curled slightly, the uneven pause between breaths, the quiet signals the body gives when something deeper is wrong. He is compensating, she said calmly, her tone steady, measured, but it is failing. The doctor frowned, defensive now. We are following the correct protocol, he replied quickly, as if saying it louder would make it more true. Emily finally lifted her eyes, not confrontational, not emotional, just certain. Your protocol is based on the wrong assumption, she said, and the words landed heavier than expected. Daniel stepped closer, his presence commanding, used to ending conversations with a single look. You are a server, he said, each word controlled, deliberate. You do not get to override a licensed physician. But even as he said it, his gaze flickered back to Lucas, And that flicker betrayed him, because power means nothing when it cannot protect what matters. Emily nodded slightly, acknowledging his authority without submitting to it. "You are right," she said quietly. "I do not get to." A pause, just long enough to let the weight settle. "But you do." The words shifted something, not in the room, but in Daniel, because for the first time, the decision was not about control, it was about trust, and trust is something he had not given freely in years. The doctor spoke again, faster now, filling the silence. "Sir, we need to continue what we are doing. We cannot risk unverified intervention." But his voice lacked conviction. It trembled at the edges. Emily took a slow breath, then crouched slightly, bringing herself closer to Lucas without touching him yet, her hand still waiting. "His airway is not the primary issue," she said, almost to herself. "It is neurological misfiring." Daniel blinked, the words unfamiliar in this context, yet precise, too precise to ignore. "How would you even know that?" he asked, and this time there was no anger in his voice, only disbelief. Emily did not answer right away. Her eyes traced the boy's breathing pattern again, counting silently, calculating something no one else could see. Then she spoke, softer now, but somehow clearer. "Because I have seen it before." Another pause, heavier this time, filled with something unspoken, something that did not belong to this room. Daniel felt it, even if he could not name it. The doctor exhaled sharply. "This is not the time for speculation," he insisted, but he did not move forward. He did not stop her either. And that silence became permission, the kind no one officially gives, but everyone recognizes. Emily finally extended her hand. Not rushed, not dramatic, just precise, like someone following a path already decided. And as her fingers hovered just inches above Lucas's shoulder, Daniel's voice broke through one last time, quieter than before, almost unfamiliar to himself. "If you are wrong," he started, but the sentence did not finish, because deep down he already knew the truth. Doing nothing was no longer an option, and Emily, without looking up, answered the unspoken fear with a calm that did not belong to a waitress. "Then you will still lose him." And in that moment, the room fell completely silent, not out of confusion, not out of fear, but because everyone understood that the next second would change everything. No one gave permission, but no one stopped her. And that was enough. Emily's hand finally made contact, two fingers resting lightly against a point just below Lucas's collarbone, her touch careful, deliberate, as if she was following a map no one else could see. The doctor inhaled sharply, ready to interrupt, but something held him back, something in the way she moved, not hesitant, not experimental, but exact, like someone who had done this before under far greater pressure. Emily adjusted Lucas's position by a few inches, tilting his shoulder, aligning his spine with a precision that seemed almost invisible to the untrained eye. "Watch his breathing," she said quietly, not asking, simply stating. Daniel leaned in despite himself, his entire world narrowing to the rise and fall of his son's chest. 1 second passed, then another, the uneven rhythm still there, fragile, unstable. But Emily did not rush. She counted under her breath, each number steady, grounded, as if time itself had slowed to match her pace. Then her other hand moved, pressing gently along a specific point near his neck, not forceful, not random, but intentional. And for a moment, nothing happened. The room held its breath, uncertainty pressing in from all sides. Daniel felt it building again, that familiar panic clawing at his control, ready to take over. "This is not working," the doctor whispered, more to himself than anyone else. But Emily did not react, her focus unbroken, her voice barely audible now. "Wait," she said, and there was something in that single word that made everyone listen, not because it was loud, but because it was certain. Then it happened, subtle at first, almost easy to miss. Lucas's chest paused, not in struggle, but in reset, like a system recalibrating. Then slowly, steadily, a deeper breath followed, fuller, more stable, the kind that filled the silence instead of fighting it. Daniel froze, his eyes locked on the movement, unable to process what he was seeing. Another breath came, then another, each one stronger than the last. The tension in the room shifted, not gone, but changing, turning into something else, something unfamiliar, hope. The doctor stepped closer, checking the pulse again, his expression shifting from doubt to confusion, then to something he had not expected to feel, respect. How did you, he started, but the question did not finish because he did not have the words. Emily slowly removed her hands, not abruptly, not dramatically, just as precisely as she had placed them, her movements controlled, measured, as if she was closing a chapter only she understood. Daniel looked at her now, really looked at her for the first time, not as a waitress, not as an interruption, but as something else entirely, something he could not define yet. His voice came out lower, quieter than before. What did you just do? Emily stood up slowly, her posture calm, her expression unreadable. She glanced at Lucas one more time, confirming what she already knew, then met Daniel's gaze, and in that brief moment, there was no fear, no hesitation, only truth. I corrected the signal, she said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Daniel shook his head slightly, trying to catch up to something that moved faster than his understanding. That is not possible, he said, but even he did not sound convinced. Emily tilted her head just a fraction, her voice soft but firm. It is not impossible, she replied. It is just not something you were looking for. And as the words settled into the space between them, Daniel felt something shift deep inside him, something he had built his entire life avoiding. The realization that control does not always come from power. Sometimes it comes from knowing what others overlook. And as Lucas continued to breathe, steady now, grounded, alive, the question Daniel could not ignore anymore finally surfaced, not about what she did, but about who she was and why someone like her was standing here, unnoticed. Until now, the room did not erupt in applause. It did not celebrate. It simply breathed again, slowly, cautiously, as if afraid to disturb whatever fragile balance had just been restored. Lucas's chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm now, no longer fighting for air, and that quiet consistency felt louder than any miracle. Daniel remained frozen beside him, his hand hovering just inches away, not touching, as if he was afraid. The moment would disappear if he did. Lucas, he said softly, the name unfamiliar on his own lips in this tone. The boy's eyelids fluttered slightly, not fully awake, but present, responsive, enough to send a wave of relief through the room that no one dared to express out loud. The doctor stepped back, his posture no longer authoritative, his certainty replaced with something heavier, humility. He glanced at Emily again, this time differently, not as an interruption, but as an answer. He did not have. We need to monitor him, he said quietly, more careful now, choosing each word, but even that sounded secondary to what had already happened. Daniel finally straightened, his composure returning in fragments, piece by piece, but something fundamental had shifted, something he could not reconstruct. He turned to Emily, studying her with a focus that used to be reserved for billion-dollar decisions. You said you knew this would happen, he said, not accusing, not questioning, simply trying to understand. Emily picked up the tray she had set aside earlier, her movements as calm as before, as if nothing extraordinary had just occurred. I recognized the pattern, she replied, her voice neutral, almost distant. Daniel frowned slightly. The answer too simple for the complexity of what he had just witnessed. That is not something a server recognizes, he said. And this time, there was no edge in his voice, only truth. Emily paused for a brief moment, just enough to acknowledge the statement, but not enough to explain it. People recognize what they have seen before, she said, then turned slightly, as if preparing to return to her shift, the normal rhythm of a world that no longer felt normal. Daniel took a step forward, stopping her without touching her. No, he said, quieter now, but firm, that is not enough. The words hung in the air, not demanding, but searching. Emily met his gaze again, and for a second, something flickered beneath her calm expression. Not fear, not hesitation, but something closer to memory, something that did not belong to this moment. The doctor spoke again, unable to stay silent any longer. Sir, with your permission, I would like to run additional diagnostics. I need to understand what changed. But Daniel did not look at him, His focus remained on Emily because for the first time, the answer he needed was not in a report, not in a machine, but standing right in front of him. "You corrected the signal," he repeated, slower now, testing the words. "What does that even mean?" Emily exhaled quietly, the smallest release of tension, then looked back at Lucas, ensuring his breathing remained stable. Only then did she respond. His body was sending the wrong instructions. She said, "I helped it remember the right ones." The simplicity of the explanation only made it more unsettling. Daniel shook his head slightly, not rejecting it, but struggling to fit it into a world built on logic and control. That kind of intervention, he began, then stopped because he did not know how to finish the sentence. Emily saved him from it. "It is not standard," she said. "That is why it works when standard fails." The words settled into him, heavier than he expected, because they carried something he had avoided his entire life. The idea that the system he trusted was not complete, that there were answers beyond it, and that those answers did not always come from the people he had been taught to trust. The room remained quiet, respectful now, as if everyone understood they had just witnessed something they were not meant to fully grasp. And as Emily finally turned to leave, blending back into the background she came from, Daniel spoke again. Not as a command, not as a demand, but as something far more rare, a request. "Emily," he said, her name unfamiliar but deliberate. "You are not done here," and she paused, just slightly, without turning back, as if deciding whether to step forward or disappear again. Emily did not turn around immediately. She stood there for a fraction longer than expected, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the tray, as if the weight she carried was not the porcelain, but the decision in front of her. The restaurant slowly began to return to life, quiet voices resuming, careful, uncertain, as though everyone was aware that something irreversible had just happened. Daniel took another step, closer, not imposing, not commanding, but present. "You said I get to decide?" He continued, his voice steady but no longer cold. "So, I am deciding." The words were simple, but they carried a shift. A man used to controlling outcomes now choosing to trust what he could not explain. Emily finally turned, her expression calm, unreadable, but her eyes held something deeper now, something that acknowledged the moment without embracing it. "He is stable for now," she said, not answering his statement directly. "But this is not over." Daniel nodded slightly, absorbing each word with more attention than he had given anything else that day. "Then stay," he said, and this time there was no authority behind it, only urgency wrapped in restraint. The doctor cleared his throat, stepping forward again, trying to reclaim some ground. "Sir, we should transfer him to the hospital immediately. We have the best equipment, the best specialists." His voice regained a hint of confidence, leaning on what he knew, what had always worked. But Daniel did not respond right away. His gaze remained fixed on Emily, because the definition of best had just been challenged in a way he could not ignore. "Will that help him?" Daniel asked quietly, not looking at the doctor. The question hung in the air, heavy, deliberate. The doctor hesitated again, just slightly, but it was enough for the truth to surface. "It will give us more control," he answered carefully, choosing a word he thought would resonate. Daniel almost smiled, but there was no humor in it, only realization. "Control," he repeated under his breath, as if testing whether the word still meant what it used to. Emily watched the exchange without interruption, her silence not passive, but intentional, allowing the moment to unfold without forcing it. Lucas shifted slightly in the booth, a small movement, but enough to draw every eye back to him. His breathing remained steady, but there was a faint tension returning to his posture, subtle, almost invisible, but Emily saw it immediately. Her focus sharpened, the calm in her expression narrowing into precision. She stepped forward again, this time without hesitation, placing the tray aside completely, no longer balancing between roles. Daniel noticed the shift, the way she moved, the way the room seemed to follow her without realizing it. "What is happening?" he asked, not demanding, but needing to understand. Emily knelt beside Lucas once more, her hand hovering briefly before making contact, her voice low, controlled. "It is coming back," she said, And the words landed harder than anyone expected. The doctor stepped closer, alert now, his confidence wavering again. That is not possible. His vitals just stabilized, he insisted. But even as he spoke, he began checking again, searching for confirmation he was no longer sure he would find. Emily adjusted Lucas's position slightly, her movements quicker this time, more decisive, as if the window was smaller now, the margin thinner. Stability is not the same as recovery, she said, her tone sharper than before. Not emotional, but urgent. Daniel felt the shift immediately, the fragile hope tightening into tension again. "What do you need?" he asked, and the question came without hesitation, without ego, without negotiation. Emily glanced up at him for the briefest moment, and in that look, there was no waitress, no background figure, only someone who understood exactly what was at stake. "I need you to trust me before it is too late," she said, and this time there was no room left for doubt. Because the next moment would not wait for permission. Daniel did not hesitate this time. Not even for a second. Whatever instinct had held him back before was gone, replaced by something far more powerful, the raw understanding that time was no longer on their side. "Do it," he said, his voice firm, clear, leaving no room for interruption. The doctor opened his mouth, ready to object, to argue, to reclaim authority, but the words never came, because for the first time, he realized he was no longer the one in control. Emily did not acknowledge the command. She did not need to. She was already moving. Her focus narrowed completely onto Lucas, the world around her fading into silence. Her hands worked with a quiet urgency now, precise but faster, adjusting his posture again, shifting his shoulders by inches, aligning something invisible, something internal, something only she seemed to understand. "Stay with me," she whispered, not to Daniel, not to the doctor, but to Lucas, her voice softer now, almost personal, as if reaching beyond what anyone else could hear. Lucas's breathing began to falter again, the steady rhythm breaking into uneven intervals, shorter, sharper, the kind that signaled instability returning. Daniel felt it immediately, the fragile sense of relief. Collapsing into tension once more, his hands clenched at his sides, powerless again. But this time he did not step in, he did not interrupt. He watched because now he understood that control meant knowing when not to interfere. The doctor checked the readings again, his movements quicker now, less certain. "His oxygen levels are dropping," he said, unable to hide the concern in his voice. But Emily did not react to the numbers. She was watching something else, something deeper than what the machines could measure. Her fingers moved to a different position, pressing gently along a specific point near Lucas's upper spine, holding it there, steady, deliberate, counting again under her breath. The seconds stretched, heavier now, each one carrying more weight than the last. "Come on," Daniel muttered under his breath, not as a command, but as a plea, something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Emily's expression tightened slightly, the first visible crack in her calm. Not panic, but intensity, the kind that comes when the margin for error disappears. "He is resisting," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. Then she adjusted again, a subtle shift in angle, a change so small. It looked meaningless, but everything about her said it was not. Lucas's body reacted almost instantly, a slight release in the tension of his shoulders, a deeper inhale, still uneven, but stronger than before. The doctor leaned in, watching closely now, no longer dismissive, but learning. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice no longer defensive, but searching. Emily did not look at him. "I am not forcing it," she replied, her tone steady despite the pressure. "I am guiding it." The distinction hung in the air, simple, but profound. Daniel felt it, even if he could not fully understand it, because for the first time, someone was not trying to control the situation. They were working with it. Lucas's breathing shifted again, the uneven pattern smoothing out gradually like a signal finding its path. One breath, then another, each one more stable, more consistent. The tension in the room began to ease. Not completely, but enough to feel the difference. The doctor checked. Again, his expression changing as the numbers confirmed what he was seeing. "It is stabilizing," he said, almost in disbelief. Emily held her position for a few seconds longer, ensuring the pattern would hold. Then slowly, carefully, she released the pressure, her hands retreating with the same precision they had moved with. The moment lingered, suspended, waiting to see if the balance would break again, but it did not. Lucas continued to breathe, steady now, grounded, present. Daniel exhaled, for what felt like the first time in minutes, the weight in his chest easing slightly. But his eyes never left Emily, because now the question was no longer whether she could help. It was how far her knowledge went and what it would cost to understand it. Emily sat back slightly, her posture relaxing just enough to signal that the immediate danger had passed, but her gaze remained focused, attentive, as if she was still listening to something no one else could hear. And in that quiet, controlled stillness, one truth became impossible to ignore. She had not guessed. She had not improvised. She had known exactly what to do, and that kind of certainty did not come from chance. Silence settled differently. This time, not heavy with fear, but filled with something unfamiliar to everyone in the room. Respect, the kind that does not announce itself, but changes the way people breathe, the way they look, the way they listen. Lucas remained still but stable, his chest rising in a quiet, consistent rhythm that no longer fought against itself. Daniel watched every breath as if it were a fragile promise, one that could disappear if he looked away, but did not. It held, steady, real, and for the first time that night, he allowed himself to believe it might continue. The doctor stepped back slowly, removing his hand from the monitor as though it no longer held the answers he needed. His gaze returned to Emily, but now there was no resistance left in it, only curiosity and something deeper, something closer to humility. This method, he said carefully, choosing each word with caution, it is not documented. Emily remained kneeling for a moment longer, her attention still on Lucas, confirming stability not through numbers but through patterns only she seemed to recognize. Not everything that works is written down, she replied quietly. Then she stood, her movements slower now, the urgency fading but the precision still there. Daniel stepped closer again, not towering, not imposing, but searching, his voice lower than before. You knew exactly when it would happen, he said, not as a question, but as a realization forming in real time. Emily met his gaze, and for a brief second, the calm surface of her expression shifted, just enough to reveal something beneath it, something older, heavier. I recognized the sequence, she said, and the way she said it carried more weight than the words themselves. Daniel narrowed his eyes slightly, not in suspicion, but in focus, the way he analyzed patterns in markets, in data, in people. That is not recognition, he said slowly. That is prediction. The distinction lingered between them, quiet but undeniable. Emily did not deny it, but she did not confirm it either. She simply looked back at Lucas, her attention returning to what mattered most. Prediction only matters if you act in time, she said, and there was something in her tone now, something personal, something that did not belong to this moment alone. Daniel felt it, even if he could not name it, because it sounded less like theory and more like experience, the kind that leaves marks you do not see. The doctor stepped forward again, more cautious this time. If you have encountered this before, he said, then you understand how rare this condition is. We have specialists who have studied it for years. Emily nodded slightly, acknowledging the statement without challenging it. And they're still studying it, she replied. Not dismissive, just factual. The difference landed harder than any argument. Daniel exhaled slowly, the realization settling deeper with each passing second. Everything he had trusted, every system he had invested in, every expert he had relied on, had just been surpassed by someone who stood unnoticed in his world. Until now. You are not just someone who has seen this before, he said quietly. You are someone who understands it. Emily did not respond immediately, her silence stretching just long enough to confirm what words might complicate. Then she reached for the tray again, lifting it with the same steady hand she had used moments before to change everything. The contrast was almost unreal, as if the same person existed in two completely different worlds. Daniel shook his head slightly, not in disbelief anymore, but in recognition. Why are you here? He asked, The question simple, but loaded with everything he could not reconcile. Emily paused, her grip on the tray tightening just slightly, the smallest sign that the answer was not simple, not easy, not something she offered freely. She looked at him again, and this time there was no distance in her gaze, only truth held back by choice. Because knowing how to save someone, she said softly, does not always mean you were able to. The words lingered, heavier than anything that had been said so far, and in that moment, Daniel understood something he had never considered before, that expertise could come from loss, that precision could be shaped by failure, and that the quietest person in the room might carry the deepest understanding, not because they studied it, but because they lived through it. And as Emily turned slightly, ready to step away once more, the question that formed in Daniel's mind was no longer about what she could do, but what had happened to make her stop. The words did not fade when she spoke them. They stayed, lingering in the space between them, reshaping the air, reshaping the way Daniel looked at her, because now it was no longer about what she had done. It was about what she had lost. Lucas shifted again, a small movement, but this time his eyes opened slightly, unfocused at first, then slowly finding clarity. Dad, he whispered, his voice weak but present, and that single word broke something open inside Daniel that no success had ever touched. He dropped to one knee beside him, his hand finally resting on his son's shoulder, grounding himself in something real, something that did not come with contracts or conditions. I am here, he said quietly, the words steady, but his grip tighter than before. As if holding on to more than just a moment, Emily watched for a second, confirming the stability again, the rhythm, the response, the signs that told her the immediate danger had passed. That she stepped back, not drawing attention, not claiming anything, just creating space for what mattered. The doctor exhaled slowly, the tension in his posture easing, but his mind clearly racing, trying to connect what he had just seen with everything he had been taught. We need to document this, he said, almost automatically. This could change protocols. Emily glanced at him briefly, her expression neutral, but there was a quiet weight behind her eyes. Protocols do not change because of one moment, she said. They change when someone is willing to admit what they missed. The statement landed gently, but it carried a truth no one argued with. Daniel stood up slowly, his hand still resting on Lucas for a moment longer before letting go. Not because he wanted to, but because he needed to face something else now, something just as important. He turned back to Emily, his gaze sharper now, not with authority, but with intent. You said you have seen this before, he said, not studied it, not read about it, seen it. Emily did not respond right away. Her eyes moved briefly to Lucas again, then back to Daniel, as if weighing something internal, something she had kept contained for a long time. Yes, she said finally, simple, direct. Daniel nodded once, the confirmation settling deeper than he expected. And you knew exactly what to do, he continued, not questioning, but building towards something he could no longer ignore. Emily held his gaze, and this time she did not deflect. I knew what I should have done sooner, she said, and the shift in her words changed everything. The room seemed to quiet again, not out of tension, but out of understanding, because this was no longer about Lucas. This was about her, about something that had already happened, something that could not be undone. Daniel felt it, the weight behind her calm, the reason behind her distance. What happened, he asked, and for the first time, the question was not about answers, it was about her. Emily's grip tightened slightly around the tray, the smallest movement, but enough to reveal that this part was different, harder. Someone I cared about, she said slowly. Her voice, steady but softer now, showed the same signs. A pause, longer this time, heavier. I recognized it too late. The words did not need more detail. They carried enough on their own, enough to fill the silence with meaning. Daniel looked at her differently now, not as someone who stepped in, but as someone who had once been in his position, powerless, watching something slip away, and that understanding changed everything. Because now he was not just looking at someone who saved his son, he was looking at someone who had already paid the price for knowing how. The doctor lowered his gaze slightly, the weight of her words settling into his own understanding, reshaping what he thought expertise meant. Emily straightened her posture, The moment of vulnerability closing as quickly as it had opened. Her expression returning to its calm, controlled state. But something had shifted, something that could not be unseen. Daniel exhaled slowly, the realization anchoring itself deep within him. "You did not fail," he said, quietly, the words not meant as comfort, but as truth. Emily met his eyes again, and for a second, something softened, not fully, not completely, but enough to acknowledge what he was trying to say. "I learned," she replied, and in that single sentence, everything she had done made sense, not as a miracle, not as luck, but as the result of something far deeper, something built from loss, refined by time, and carried in silence. And as the room slowly returned to its normal rhythm, there was one truth no one could ignore anymore. The quietest person in the room had not just changed what happened, she had changed how they would see everything that came after the room no longer felt the same. Not because anything had changed on the surface. The lights were still warm, the tables still set, the quiet hum of the city still pressed against the windows. But something deeper had shifted, something invisible that could not be undone. Lucas sat up slowly now, supported by his father's steady hand, his breathing calm, his eyes clearer with each passing second. "I feel okay," he said softly, and those 3 words carried more weight than any diagnosis ever could. Daniel nodded, but he did not speak right away, because he understood now that this moment was not something to fill with noise. It was something to recognize, to remember, to respect. He helped Lucas settle back comfortably, then turned to Emily again. But this time, there was no urgency left in his posture, no demand, no expectation, only intention, the kind that comes when someone decides something without needing to announce it. "You are not going back to just serving tables," he said, his voice calm, certain but not controlling. Emily did not react the way most people would. There was no surprise, no immediate refusal, no acceptance. She simply looked at him, steady, thoughtful, as if she had already considered this possibility long before he said it. "You built something that reaches people," she replied. "Quietly, hospitals, systems, teams." Daniel nodded once, understanding where she was going before she finished. "And you think that is where this belongs," he said, not defensive, but open. Emily held his gaze, then shook her head slightly. "I think it depends on what you are willing to change," she said, and the statement settled between them with quiet clarity, because she was not talking about buildings or equipment. She was talking about perspective, about the willingness to see what had been overlooked. The doctor stepped forward again, more composed now, but still carrying the weight of everything he had witnessed. "If knowledge like this exists," he said carefully, "it should be studied, shared, understood." Emily nodded, not disagreeing, but not fully agreeing either. "Understanding does not come from observing alone," she said. "It comes from listening to what is not fit." Daniel exhaled slowly, the truth of that statement anchoring itself deeper than anything else that had been said, because for years he had built success by trusting patterns, systems, predictable outcomes. And now, standing here, he realized that the most important answer had come from outside all of it, from someone who had been invisible in his world, until she was not. Lucas looked up at Emily, his expression curious, open. "Are you a doctor?" he asked, the question simple, honest. Emily smiled slightly, the first real softness in her expression. "No," she said, then paused just long enough to let the moment settle. "I just learned how to listen better." Lucas nodded, accepting the answer without needing more, because sometimes simplicity carries more truth than explanation. Daniel watched that exchange closely, then looked back at Emily. Something resolved in his eyes now, something quiet but unshakable. "Then help me change how we listen," he said, not as a command, not as an offer, but as a recognition of what needed to happen next. Emily did not answer immediately, her gaze drifting for a brief moment, as if considering a path she had once walked away from, then returning to the present, to the people in front of her, to the choice now within her control. "I will help him," she said, glancing at Lucas, "and I will show you what you are not seeing." Another pause, softer this time. "But the rest," she added, "that depends on whether you are willing to unlearn what you think." "You already know," Daniel nodded, not because he fully understood, but because for the first time he was willing to. And as Emily stepped back once more, blending into the quiet rhythm of the room, not disappearing, but no longer needing to stand at the center. One truth remained, steady and undeniable. Sometimes the person who changes everything does not raise their voice. They raise the standard. And the world only notices when it finally learns how to listen.